Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, hi guys, thanks for joining this session on model-driven power apps today. I'm going to start with a quick introduction of myself. So, I am Subhra and I've graduated in computer engineering from Bangalore, and I've worked around edtech product management and user experience in India itself. So currently I'm with Dogma Group working as a consultant, and my interest in Power Apps kind of began with Dogma Group itself. Right? So as a company, we primarily focus on Microsoft Dynamics 365, and Power Platform is kind of heavily integrated with Dynamics, right? So that's what helped me get that initial exposure to the platform. And in today's session, I'll be taking you through a demo on how we can build custom business applications using model-driven Power Apps. And this session is from the business user perspective. So if you're just starting out with Power Apps, or if you're looking at a way to build, apps with low code or no code, this might be the perfect gateway. So we'll be starting with a few core concepts so that we can understand the demo better. Right, so for the first core concept, we'll be looking at what relational databases are. So this is kind of an important concept right at the heart of model-driven apps. Right? It's all about creating a data model, creating a database, and with practically no code. Right? So to create, let's say, a model-driven app with a nice UI, you don't really need to know everything that's going on in the background. Right? So let's say you work for a company where you have to track your customers, your contacts, and their accounts. So each of these components are called tables. Right? So account is a table and contact is a table as well, right? And accounts can have different attributes associated with it. So account name, number, these are your attributes, right? And these are called columns. And contact is also a kind of table, as I said, which gives you a different kind of information as compared to your account, right? And the reason this is called a relational database is simply because they relate to each other. And for example, one account may have different contacts associated with it, as I've shown here, right? So in database language, this is called a one-to-many relationship. And the reason I'm explaining all of this is because I'm going to take you through how we can build this using the Microsoft Dataverse. So moving on, Dataverse was formerly called the CDS, or the Common Data Service. And simply put, it's a database that's hosted in your Microsoft 365. Right? So Dataverse lets you create your tables, columns, relationships, rules, everything through your web browser. Right? But what makes the Dataverse even better is how Microsoft has engineered the Power Platform to leverage it so easily. Right? Because all the data that exists in your tables, right, you can connect your Power Apps to it. So maybe your flow can go into the table and retrieve information for you, or maybe you want to pass it to a chatbot, right? You can also use your Power BI to query that information, and it'll potentially report it back to you as a dashboard. Right? So it's pretty exciting what Power Apps and the Dataverse bring together for the user. And when you're building apps, you can easily structure your data and your business logic through a simple drag and drop kind of interface in Power Apps, right? So that is made possible by the Dataverse as well. So then a model-driven Power App is actually the front-end user interface that allows the user to interact with the data model that you create, right? That's the reason it's called model-driven Power App. When you talk about, let's say, a Canvas app, it'll start with a blank canvas and you pixel perfectly put everything together, right? But a model-driven app is not that. It starts with a data model and you build on top of that. So today we'll be building this lovely UI in a component style way, and I'm going to take you through that now in a demo. So when you're starting to make your model-driven Power App, we'll be starting with the Power Apps Maker portal. That's make.powerapps.com. And what you'll see is when you've got the Dataverse deployed, right, you'll find tables over here. So tables are a kind of data type, right? So some of them are already there for you to get started. Let me just show that. So you can see account, and then if you just scroll down, you can also see contact, right? So these are your pre-built entities that you can use as it is, or if you don't want to use it, as it is, you can always configure extra bits of information into it and use it in a particular way that you desire. And there's also an activity which will help you track your tasks, emails, notes, and so on. So basically, this is just a bunch of stuff that's already pre-built for you. Okay, but to create your own custom application, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to build what's called a solution. So a solution in non-technical terms can be thought of like a bucket where we're going to put everything that we're building, right? So today we'll be building an app, right? We'll be building a data model, and we're going to contain all of that into one solution. So basically what that means is we can move it around and use it in other places if we need to, right? So it just holds everything together. So let's go ahead and create a new solution. For the naming convention, we don't really have a naming convention as such, but I'm just going to prefix everything that I'm building today with a P so that it's easier to find and easier to track, okay? So I'm going to build my first solution called equipment ordering. Now it'll ask you for a publisher, right? So publisher is nothing but it just indicates who has developed this application, right? So for starters, we don't really want to dwell into creating a new publisher. So I'm just going to go ahead and select the default publisher. And sorry. And then I'm going to create. Here we have it. So this is my solution, right? And at this point, it really doesn't have anything, right? It's just a holding bucket. So the first thing I want to do is start building my data model, right? So if you recall that picture of the accounts and contact that I just showed in the template. So one second. Yeah, so I'm going to start by building my table first, because when you're building a data model, right, the table is the first thing you create. So for today, what we're going to do is we're going to build an app that allows any organization, right, to order office equipments and to track those orders of office equipment. So the first table I'm going to create is going to hold all the pieces of equipments themselves, like desks, chairs, printers, and everything that people might want to order in an office. Right, so again, I'm prefixing this with a P, and I'm going to create my table called equipments. So when I enter my display name, right, the plural name is worked out itself, and Power App also works out what's called a schema name that works behind the scenes. I can enable any kind of attachment that I want to, and then I'm just going to create and click on OK. So here we have it. This is my solution, and inside that I've got my first table. So this table is practically empty, right? So we need to enter some columns into it. So you can just simply go to add column here, again prefixing it. So what might be the columns that are relevant to my app now? So I might want to add a description, for instance, right? So I'm just going to add a description column. And this is the data type. So this is just to indicate what kind of data you want to enter in your column, right? So once you enter the data type, it's kind of locked in. So you need to be really careful when you're doing this. So when I say description, it's not necessarily just one line of text, right? It can be multiple lines of text. It depends on the person, right? So I'm just going to select text area for that. I'm going to keep it as optional because I don't think everyone wants to enter a long description always. I'm just going to click on done. And this is my first column inside my first table, right? Now, basically, I repeat the same thing again and again for different kind of columns, right? So I'm just going to add a column again. I might want a model number over here. So let's just create one. Now, model number, I'm keeping the data type as text itself, because it's not really acting as a number as per se, right? From a database point of view, it's not really adding anything. It's not really subtracting anything. It's simply a reference number, right? So I'm just going to keep that as text, and I'm going to click on done. And again, add a column. Let's add a price for it. So the data type for price will essentially be currency. It's indicated by the $sign, and in the background, actually, it's going to enable your currency and multi-currency conversions, which is a tad bit more complex than what we aim to go into today. So you just click on currency and again, done. Okay, so the next thing I want to create is something a little different. which the data type I'm going to choose is called a choice. Okay, so I want to have a pick list or kind of a drop down list for to choose what kind of equipment I want to order. So every form you've ever filled out will have one of these, right? Instead of typing in your answer, you just select it from the list. So that's what I'm trying to create here. I'm just gonna type of equipment, and then if you see here, you'll get choice. You just select choice, and over here you'll see there's already a bunch of choice types, right? So instead of choosing these, since I'm making my own custom application, I'm going to select new choice, and then I'm going to add my different items. So what are we trying to choose? We're trying to choose different types of office equipment, right? So my item can be a desk, my another item can be chair, sorry, maybe a printer, and then save. So I can select a default value for this, but it does not really make sense to select a default value, right? What if someone enters a model number for a chair and then the default value is desk, right? So that's just gonna create confusion. So I'm just gonna leave that blank, and I am gonna click on done. Okay, so this was my first table with 4 custom columns, right? So I'm just gonna save that table. Right, so I just want to take a second to show you what's going on in the background. So when you provision a new entity in the Dataverse, right, it kind of creates a whole lot of scaffolding behind the scenes, right? So all these columns like modified by, modified on, owner, these are not things that I just created, right? So this is just done for you to kind of manage all the records in the database. And right now, what I'm going to do next is I want to create a second table, and this is going to be to track the orders of the office equipment, right? So I'm just going back to my solution. So this was my solution, right? So inside my solution, you can see I brought in, it's brought in the choice the choice type as well, right? The data type, and it's just holding everything together. Let's go ahead and add the second table now. So I think my net is a little slow. Yeah. So I'm just going to add a new table to track my equipment orders now. Okay, so the same thing, display name, plural name is worked out, the schema name is worked out. I can enable attachments if I feel that it's going to be relevant to what I'm creating here. So I'm just going to create the second table. So inside my solution, I've got my second table now, and again it's practically empty. So when you get this notification provisioning your table in the background, you may continue making changes. This is just things cooking up in the background. So as a business user, you don't really need to bother about all of that. And I don't really have any custom columns yet, right? So let's add some custom columns, and we want to play around the dates a little bit now because we're tracking orders, right? So I want to see when was the order date. Okay, so for order date, you need to select the data type. I'm not really concerned about date and time. I don't really care what time it was ordered. I want the date, right? So I'm just selecting the date, and I'm going to make that as required, and done. So this was my first column. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to create an estimated arrival time for the things that we have ordered. Okay, I'm just going to create estimated arrival date. And again, this is essentially a date only type. And I'm going to create something new over here, right? So I'm trying to bring in business logic in the Dataverse now. So what I'm going to create is called a calculated field. So when you create a calculated field, it's going to take something else that's in the system, and it's going to create a calculation, right? So the reason we are doing this is I want to say that my estimated arrival date is always going to be 14 days from my order date, right? So all I do is I just add an action, and I say I want to add 14 days to my order date, right? So I'm just going to add 14 days to my order date, and I'm gonna click on OK. So this is a relatively simple formula. You can have all kinds of if, else, and then statements here. So this is an example of business logic in Power Apps, right? So also one thing to note here is, when you're creating a calculated field, it's very important to enable the pop-ups, right? Otherwise, you might just get stuck like I had done in the first time. So I'm just going to save and close and done. So here we have it. We've got 2 custom columns, right? Let's add one more column. And now I want to start bringing in some relationships for my data, right? So we had an introduction to the relational databases, right? And that's what we're trying to build. So let's try to understand how to add some relationships, right? So I've got an order. I know when it was ordered, and we know when it's going to arrive, right, from this table, but we don't really know what exactly we are ordering. So all of our equipments are located in the first table that we created, right? So now we need some way to connect these two. So let's just create a column called equipments. And for the data type, I'm going to choose a new one that's called lookup. Right, so lookup relationship is a special type of field which will allow you to create a relationship to something else in the data model, right? So the aim of doing this is to say that this order is related back to a certain piece of equipment, right? It might be a desk or chair or whatever. So naturally, our related table is going to be equipments, right? And since I've prefixed it with a P, it should be somewhere here. This is our first table, right? So I'm just going to click on that and I'm going to click on done. That's our first relationship. Now I want to create one more lookup relationship to link this to the person who has placed the order. Okay, so now in this scenario for internal use, I want to choose a table that already exists in our Dataverse, and it's called users. Okay, so I'm just going to write ordered by, this is my column name. My data type is again going to be a lookup relationship, and my related table is going to be an internal table called user. So this is all the internal users in the system, so I don't really have to add them all in, right? So I'm just going to click on done, and I'm going to save that table. Okay, so what we have now is a data model. We've created 2 tables and we've created certain columns inside them. We've simply created a business logic. We've created 2 lookup relationships as well, right? So essentially our relational database is done. So you don't really need to worry about, worry about one-to-many relationships, many-to-one relationships. You don't need to get your head around that. All you do is you have to say link this back to a certain table, and it's going to do that for you. Right? So this is what we're talking about when we say a low code of building a database, and all that scaffolding is in there. The relationships are just kind of connected up for you, and we're good to go. Right? So if I go back to my solution, you'll see that all the extra pieces are added to my solution because I brought these in through lookup relationships, right? User and equipment. So everything is kind of here. It's just holding up in one place, right? So the next thing we need to do now is to configure what our screen is going to look like, because ultimately we're building an app, right? So we need to know how our screen is going to look like when the user comes into the database, for example. They will open up a record, right? And what do they see on the screen, basically? So that's called a form. So I'm just going to go to my first table to set up my user interface. Here we have it. So to set up my thing, I'm going to go into forms first. Okay, and I'm going to go into the main form. Just a second. Not sure why it's not loading up. Here it is. So what we are seeing now is what the user will be seeing on the screen, right? If you don't add any of your components. So this is kind of a skeleton of a form, and there's not much here at the moment, right? So we allowed our attachments when we created the table. That's the reason this is the timeline is there. And from here, I'm just going to bring in bits of information that I created through a simple drag and drop kind of structure. And this is what we mean by component design, right? So the first thing we created was description. Let's add that here. Then we created the model number. Let's have that here. And the price. Then the type of equipment. Right, so let's go ahead and save that. So this is how our screen is going to look like. Right, let's go back to the second table and configure that screen. In my solution, I go to my equipment orders. That's my second table. I'm going to go into forms and I'm going to go into the main form. So again, a skeleton of a form. Let's add in our components. So the first thing was we created an order date, right? Then we created an estimated arrival date. Drag and drop. Then we want to know who ordered it. So I'm just going to keep that in that corner. See, it's here. Then the last thing I want is what kind of equipment, right? That's the lookup relationship we created earlier. Let's give that a save. Now, the other thing I need to create after I've configured how my screen is going to look like is when I go into my database, what is my column setup, right? How is it supposed to look like? So if I go into my view, what is the column setup like? Does the name come in front? Does the model number come in front and stuff like that? Let's go into the first table again and set up the view. So we go into the views tab and we go into the active views. Now here, this is my column setup right now, right? So I want to modify that. I don't think I want to create it on. So I'm just going to remove that. Let's add my model number over here. Sorry. And then let's add the price maybe. So you can also choose to sort it by, different stuff. So here it's sorting by name. I'm just going to cross that. And I'm going to sort it by the model number. Okay, so I'm going to save that and then go back to my second table. This was the first table that I edited, right? So I'm just going to go into my solution again. I'm going to go to my equipment orders. That's my second table. And again, I'm going to go to the views tab. So in views, select the active orders. That's the active view. And again, created on is something I feel it's not relevant to what I'm creating. So I'm going to remove that. I only want my estimated arrival date of here, right? I'm going to save that and go back. So that's our data model done. And that was all of that was done using the Dataverse, right? So we've built a data model with practically no code. We've put some business logic in there. And now finally, what we're going to do is we will be creating our model-driven app. And model-driven app is just the final piece, the front end of all of this. Right, so let's go into our equipment ordering. Let's go into new and select the model-driven app. Just give it a moment. Right, so let's name my app as equipment orders itself. I don't want a description. So I've created my solution first, right? So I already have an existing solution. Let's click on that and click on next. So I want to select my solution. That is this, right? I've prefixed it with P for easy identification. I'm going to select that and I'm going to click on done. So this is now behind the scenes, right? The configuration of the app. So this is showing me which entities or which part of my data model are in there, including the forms and views, what I want in my app, what I want out of my app, all of that is there. So there's only one thing that's missing, that's the sitemap, right? So sitemap is nothing but the navigation of your of the app you're creating, right? So I'm just going to create a navigation around it. If I click on edit, I just want to give this a name. And I'm going to show that to you in the final app, how this works. Okay, I'm just going to name this workspace. Let's call these equipment tracking. Let's add a sub area. So for sub area, you need to enter an entity, right? Here you can see there's a red mark. So you just select let's select the first entity over here. So entity is tables, right? So the first table we created was equipments, right? And sorry. Equipments was my first table. Then I'm going to add one more sub area for another table. That was my equipment orders. Equipment orders, right? I'm just going to save that. That's my sitemap. And then, yep, now we don't really have much errors. I'm just going to save that again. Let's validate it. So there is a warning. I'm not really concerned about the yellow ones. We're just concerned about the red ones for now, right? I'm just going to publish my app. And finally, let's play. Here we have it. This is a model-driven app created, right? So we created it from scratch because it is a model-driven app. All of these components were already there for you. So I didn't really create these Excel templates or run report and stuff like that, right? I just created these two tables and I added certain columns inside them. So this is my first table, right? Let's try to create a record. So if I click on new, now you can see all the columns and how I configured it, right? Let's give it a name, desk. I want a mesh back leather seat. And my model number can be, it's a reference number, so I can just enter anything. My price can be, let's say 2000. And now you'll see the currency, right? So my environment is configured for the Indian currency, Nepali currency. That's the reason it's coming as this. You can configure it as per your requirement. And this is my drop down. This was my pick list, right? So I'm just going to create a desk kind of record, and I'm going to save that. Go back to equipments, and this is my record, right? So you'll notice that my column setup that I configured earlier is not really created here, right? I'm just going to publish that in a while and show it to you. Let's create one more record for equipment orders. So here again, I'm gonna name it as desk one. Let's add an order date and see how that works. I'm gonna add it for the first, okay, and then I'm gonna, yeah. So you see, this was the lookup relationship we created, right? So this desk is actually created in my equipments table. So now when I'm trying to enter an equipment here, it'll actually show me that record. Same for ordered by. If I go to ordered by and if I just type my name, I'm an internal user, right? So it's gonna pop up. I'm just going to select that, click on save. Once I save it, now you see it's added 14 days to my order date, right? So this was the business logic we were talking about. Now for my column setup, it's not really reflecting here. So I'm just going to go back and go back to my equipment table. Then go back to my views, to my active views, because it's in the active view, right? This was the view we were talking about. So we go here and we publish. So this was where I missed out, guys. I think once we publish this and you refresh this, here we have it. So we have our column setup configured as well, right? So yeah, so that was our business logic, relationships, everything, relational database created from the Dataverse, and we finally created a model-driven Power App. And I know it's a lot to take in 30 minutes, but if you wish to learn more, here are a few things that I would recommend. So you can just download your Power Platform trial through your Office 365 account, right? And you can work your way towards a certification, which will give your skills a boost. And yeah, that was it for me, guys. If there are any questions, please feel free to drop me the questions in the chat box. Any questions? So yeah, so there is, when you say Canvas app, right, it is essentially creating the user experience. It has to start from a blank canvas, right? So when I showed you the model driven app, you saw things like import to Excel, export to Excel, and stuff like that. If you don't want those in your app, if you want it to be completely configured as per your business requirement, I think then you use a Canvas app. But if you're just starting out and you want to build it through a data model, that's when you use a model driven app. Any other questions, guys? So I'm going to drop my contact information in the chat box. You can reach out to me if there's any question related to this when you're trying it out. And that's it for me. Thank you, guys. Over to you, Ashish.
Yeah, thank you, Subhra. Awesome session. It's so cool that we can build a business grade application with simple logic and without even using any code. Great demo as well. So yeah, if you have any other questions, you can contact Subhra. She's gonna drop her, yeah, already. I guess she's gonna drop her contact information in the comments. Uh, yeah, I think I hope you guys are having awesome time. Like I'm having. So we still have one more session where we are going to take deep dive into the AI capabilities of the Power Platform. So the next session is by Darshana Karti. She's a data scientist and also a business analyst.